Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Welcome back to our online class. And the purpose of the video lecture this week is to talk a little bit about graphics and how graphics can help us as we're writing information and as we're putting information together to present information in a document to an audience that communicates information and communicates a specific message without having to use traditional sentences and paragraphs and some of the other skills that we've been working on over the course of the semester. And then in just a little while, I'm going to show you an example of an actual graphic or an actual set of graphics that a national grocery chain has started producing that I think you're going to find really interesting and I think you're going to find pretty surprising in terms of what's being produced. So stay tuned for that. We'll get to that in just a second. But I want to talk just for a couple minutes about graphics and some approaches to take with graphics and just a few things to keep in mind when we think about graphics. One is that graphics is something that we can use in the type of writing that we've been doing this semester. You don't typically use graphics in academic papers. If you're writing a narrative essay or if you're writing a traditional research paper, for example, you don't often see graphics pop up in those types of writings. You typically see sentences and paragraphs, lots of sentences, lots of paragraphs, pages and pages of information of what we consider standard sentence and paragraph format. But in the type of writing that we're doing, which is kind of a business, technical, professional writing style, you can use those graphics and you can create graphics to communicate information to an audience in a particular way, especially if the information is technical in nature, if it's complicated in nature, if you're using a lot of percentages, if you're using a lot of ratios and those kinds of numbers and those kinds of pieces of information, something that a reader's eyes might glaze over and may not pay close attention to if they're reading it in standard sentence and paragraph form. You can create it, you can put it together in a graphic and communicate that information much easier, connect with that audience better, and at the same time not take up too much space or too much white space within the actual document that you're producing. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Second thing to keep in mind with graphics is you can create graphics and not have to be a graphic artist or a graphic designer. And I know that kind of worries students a little bit when you talk about creating a graphic for an assignment or for a type of document that we're working on or that we've been working on this semester is, oh my gosh, I'm not a graphic designer. Oh my gosh, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to use Canva. I don't know how to use Pictochart. I don't know how to use Microsoft PowerPoint very well. How am I going to create a graphic? Well, the great thing is all of those platforms and others are available to where you can create a graphic very easily as long as you've got the data and information that needs to be put into that graph. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. And graphs don't have to be colorful. They don't have to be splashy. They don't have to be something that's divided up into sections or chunks or blocks or anything like that. A good graphic could be something as simple as a Microsoft Word table, where you take three elements of a particular topic and categorize some of the criteria of that topic in three different columns so that a reader can see, okay, these are the three pieces of information, and these are the details about those three specific pieces of information related to that topic. A graphic can be that simple. It doesn't have to be something colorful and loud and boisterous and something that takes a long time to create. So keep that in mind as well. And then thirdly, let me say this about graphics before we get into this a little bit more. There is no rubric for graphics. There is no standard out there that says, for example, if you're going to put a pie chart into a document or a pie graph into a document, it has to adhere to these standards. Or if you're going to use a line chart, where you show a trend, an emerging trend or a decelerating trend as a graphic, if you're going to put that in your document, there's no standardized rubric out there that says it must have these things. So what does that mean? That means you as the writer have a lot of choice and freedom and creativity to create the kind of graphic that you think is going to connect with the audience that you're targeting. And that's why we spent so much time earlier in the semester talking about graphics, or excuse me, talking about audience, because it connects specifically to graphics, especially because you have all that creativity and flexibility to create a graphic that's going to target your audience. And the fact that there isn't a sort of standard nationalized quote unquote rubric for some of these graphics means you have to have a pretty good sense of who your audience is. You have to have a pretty good sense of the topic that you're writing about. And you also have to have a pretty good sense for what you think the audience needs to know about the topic that you're writing about in that document. So those are three big picture things I would keep in mind, or big picture items I would keep in mind when it comes to graphics. Now let me share my screen and just go over a couple of more points with you as it relates to graphics, just some things you can keep in mind and just some things that you can hopefully keep in the back of your mind as you start thinking about creating graphics and creating graphics not just for this week's module, but also for the white paper assignment, which is coming up later in the semester. And I'll talk more about the white paper probably next week or the week after. But basically, what graphics do, if we were to find graphic and come up with a definition for it, it is basically a tool that supplements information in documents. And that keyword supplements is important. You shouldn't have a document that is nothing but graphics and no explanation, because the audience isn't going to know necessarily what those documents mean as it relates to the topic, or what those graphics mean in the document as it relates to the topic. What do I mean by that? If you had just 3 or 4 pages of nothing but graphics in a document related to a particular topic, if there's no context behind those graphics, if there is no reason that you've explained to the audience why you've included those graphics in the document, all they're going to see is a bunch of graphics with information maybe related to the topic, but they're not going to see how it works together. They're not going to see how it fits together, and they're not going to see how that ties together to what you want them to know about the topic. And the same is true with documents that have nothing but words and no graphics. If you have a document that needs graphics and you don't include those graphics, particularly, as I said a moment ago, if you've got a lot of percentages, ratios, things that a reader's eyes are going to typically glaze over if they read it in sentence and paragraph format, you want to have a graphic that helps communicate or illuminate that information, and do it in such a way that the reader connects with that information, but doesn't just sort of skim over it or look over it or skip it altogether because their eyes can't focus on it. So the key thing to remember with graphics, it supplements information. It should not replace information in documents. And so here's just some common types of graphics. Some of these you may be familiar with already. Some of you I know have some experience using some of these because you've worked these into your memos and some of your other informal writing assignments that you've already created and completed this semester. But just to kind of hit the big ones here and mention the big ones so that you'll have a frame of reference for those. When we talk about graphics, and we talk about graphics that are really good for sort of business, technical, and professional documents, we're talking about things like pie charts. We're talking about things like horizontal bar graphs, things like line graphs where you show accelerating trends and decelerating trends. Sometimes you will see the Wall Street Journal, if you're a reader of that, if they're writing about a financial topic, or if they're trying to show a financial trend in, let's say, government spending or Medicare funding or some other nationalized issue, oftentimes they will use a line chart where they show a line graph that has an accelerant at the top and then a decelerant at the bottom, showing a trend, showing from one period to one period how something is increased, and from another period to another period how it's decreased. You can also have a line graph that also just kind of goes up and to the right, up and to the left, or kind of does the bendy curve, or what we call the bell curve, where there's an up and a down and an up again. Line graphs come in a lot of different ways. You can also have a drawing or an illustration. It can be a simple drawing that either you have made or that you've used a computer program like Canva or Pictochart or some other program to create. Those oftentimes work very well as graphics. And then sometimes a simple photograph also is a very, very effective and powerful way to communicate information to an audience about a topic. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you create. It could be a picture that you've taken. It could be a stock image of something available for public use from a newspaper, a magazine, a website, a social services organization. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. If it's been made available for you to use, you oftentimes can use that information in your document to communicate information or illuminate information to an audience. You just want to make sure that if you use a photograph, obviously you cite that information when you put it into your document. So those are the typical types of graphics that most of us are familiar with, and I think will work well for you, both for the module coming up this week, but also for the white paper assignment later in the semester. But there's others. If you're familiar with others, or you've got another style or a different type you'd like to use, please let me know and we can certainly talk about it. I mentioned the Microsoft tables a moment ago. Those are very effective graphics as well, and you can create those right in a Word document fairly easily. But some things to think about when we talk about using graphics. I've touched on these already just a moment ago. Again, consider your audience. We spent a lot of time early in the semester in the class talking about audience and thinking about audience and who that audience might be, what their needs are, what their expectations are. All that is really important when you think about putting graphics together and creating a graphic for a document, because you really have to consider what you want your audience to know about the topic, who you think that audience group or groups is going to be, and what kind of reaction can you anticipate them having based on the graphic that you've decided to create for the document. So a lot of things to consider and think about when it comes to audience, and graphics. So keep that in mind. You also want to make sure that your images and graphics are clear. You want to make sure if you use a drawing or an illustration, like we were talking about a moment ago, as you transcribe that into a document, make sure that it's clear. Make sure the image is clear. Make sure a reader is able to gaze upon that picture or that image or that photograph and be able to tell exactly what it is and exactly what is going on. So watch out for blurs, watch out for smear spots, watch out for pixelating the picture too much or too little, to where you get blurred edges or blurred middles or blurred beginnings and endings of the document or of the graphic in the document, because all of that can be distracting and all of that can detract from the reader and for you what you want the reader and the audience to gain from that graphic. So your images and graphics should always be clear. Always make sure that the audience that is able to clearly read and understand the information. Your colors and your ink in your graphics should be rich and dark. So if you have decided to use a bar graph, for example, and you have decided to make one of the bars in the bar graph red, one of the bars in the bar graph blue, and the other bar in the bar graph green, you want to make sure that those colors are dark, that those colors are easily recognizable. And that's particularly important if you're printing off the document or if you're making copies of that document. You want to make sure you print those off in color, and you want to make sure that the printer or copier that you're using has plenty of colored ink in it so that those colors and those patterns are distinct, rich, and dark, so that there's no confusion, so that a reader is able to look at that and say, okay, the red bar goes up to this measurement or standard, the blue bar goes up to this measurement or standard, and the green bar connects to this measurement or standard. So make sure that your images and graphics, the colors and ink is rich and dark. I think it's always a great idea to give your graphic a name. You can sometimes call it Table 1 or Figure 1. You can call it Medicaid graphic. You can call it federal spending chart. You can call it whatever you want to call it, depending on whatever the topic is. But give it a name so that when the reader is looking at that, they know, oh, this is a table or a chart or a graphic or an illustration connected to this topic. And this is really important if you've got a document where there's going to be multiple graphics included. You're going to have a pie chart, let's say, on one page, a bar graph on another page, and then maybe a line chart at the end of the document. You want to make sure that the reader knows, okay, the pie chart connects to this item or this area or this aspect of the topic. The bar chart connects here. The line graph connects to this particular item or topic connected to the topic itself. So keep that in mind as well. Give it a name. It could be Table 1, Figure 1. And that also is important because that helps you refer to that in the document. If you want to provide that context, which I'll talk about in just a second, if you want to give a short summation about what you want the audience to pay attention to or what you want them to walk away from as they look at the graphic, you can refer back to that as Table 1. Table 1 shows that federal Medicaid spending has exploded in the United States since 1980, for example. Or the pie chart shows that from 2000 to 2025, federal spending has accelerated at twice the level of ordinary inflation. And I'm just making this up. I don't know if this is actually true. But if you have that explanation in that context, you can say Figure 1 or the table above or the pie chart called whatever, federal spending, or the bar graph on Medicaid spending, or whatever you have titled it. You can reference that then in the context, and the reader knows, okay, that's right. You've reminded the reader this chart, this graphic, this picture, this illustration connects to this information. And I also think it's a good idea to provide the source information at the bottom of the graphic if you did not create it. If you take a photo or an illustration, if you take some other type of graphic from someplace else, you want to put it oftentimes at the bottom of the image. And you see this oftentimes if you look at newspapers, if you look online, it'll have an image or a graphic and it'll say source, Federal Reserve, or source, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or source, Gallup, or source, whatever it is. You want to make sure that if you did not create that, or if you used information within the graphic that you had to research or obtain from somewhere else, that you give credit to where the information came from. That's really, really important. And then, as I was talking about a moment ago, give it some context. Have 2, 3, 4 sentences below that graphic to direct the reader, to point out some things you want them to notice in the graphic, to maybe explain further what the reader is looking at. Don't just assume because they see the red bar in the bar chart is corresponding here, the blue bar is corresponding here, and the green bar is corresponding here, that they know exactly what it is that you're showing. Kind of give them a few sentences to explain. If you'll notice, the trend in red is showing this, the blue is showing this, the green is showing this. Doesn't have to be very long, doesn't have to be very extended and detailed, but oftentimes you can connect those ideas together with a little context. And again, we talked a moment ago about graphics supplementing the topic, supplementing the document, that's an example. And that's why you provide some of that contextual information, or that contextual information is to help the graphic supplement what it is that you're trying to communicate. So that's all I have to say about that. So I don't want to spend too much time um, talking about all of this, because graphics are sort of what they are, and we could spend a lot more time going into sort of the nuances of bar charts and line charts and table graphs and all of that. But I just wanted to kind of make you aware of some of the information to consider when creating a graphic. We're going to work on graphics this week in this module, and we're also going to incorporate a graphic into our white paper assignment later in the semester. So we'll get to more of that, talk more about that in the weeks ahead. But as promised, I wanted to share with you a graphic, or a set of graphics, or how graphics can or cannot effectively complement information, by showing you a document that a national grocery chain is now producing on a monthly basis, that is free and available to customers when you go in the store to purchase. So, the grocery store chain that is producing this document is Trader Joe's. You may be familiar with Trader Joe's. I love Trader Joe's. Wish we had one close by here in Mississippi. But if you've shopped at Trader Joe's, you're familiar with Trader Joe's, you live in a city or town that has a Trader Joe's, you should be familiar with that grocery store chain. If you have no idea what I'm talking about with Trader Joe's, you can look it up online and get a sense of what the information is. But it's sort of a niche grocery store. Really cool place. If you've never been into one, I'd highly recommend you check one out. But they have started putting out a monthly newsletter or advertisement that goes out to customers. This is available up by the cash registers when you check out. And I was able to pick up one over the summer. And so I wanted to share this with you. And I just want to show you how graphics and text can work well and maybe not so well when they don't complement each other well. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to get a scrap sheet of paper. Could be just a loose leaf sheet of paper, could be some, blank computer paper like this, could be a notepad, whatever. And I'm going to share this image with you. And what I'd like for you to do is to take about 30 to 60 seconds. Well, let's just say 60 seconds. Take 60 seconds. And as you look at this, I want you to write down everything that comes to mind when you see this particular graphic slash newsletter slash advertisement that I'm going to show you. So don't censor it. Don't say, oh, that's a silly idea, or oh, I don't know what that means. Just write down anything that comes to your mind, either positively or negatively, that pops into your mind for about 60 seconds when I show this to you. So you may want to stop your computer here in just a minute when I show you the front page of this newsletter that is put out by Trader Joe's. Jot down that information, and then I'll come back to you in just a second. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to show this to you here in just a moment. Have your notepad and everything's on standby. And here we go, 30 to 60 seconds. Here's what it looks like. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to do that. If you need to go back and rewind it and watch it again, I tried to scroll down there for you. The document was too big to put on one screen, so if you needed to see me kind of pan up and down on the document to kind of get a general sense of it, you're welcome to do that. But I hope that you were able to jot down for about 60 seconds just anything that came to mind, any phrases, terms, concepts, ideas that came to mind when you saw that Trader Joe's advertisement, because I think it's really interesting. And I'm a bit surprised that Trader Joe's, who is very image conscious and is very conscious about what it is that they share and what it is that they show with their customer base and their consumers, really kind of surprised they put that out, but they did. And it comes out every month, as I was saying, and you can pick it up at the cash register if you're near Trader Joe's anytime soon. But what did you think? What did you think about what you saw in terms of how text and graphics is working in that document, in terms of color, in terms of position of graphics, in terms of arrangement of information on the page, what you saw there? So hang on to that list. Keep that list close by because I'm going to ask you to comment on it a little bit more later in the module. So when we talk about graphics, when we talk about the way graphics are used, the way graphics and text work together in documents, businesses and companies and industry is using this all the time, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so successfully. So keep that list close by, and we will talk about it a little bit more later on in the module. So if you have any more questions about graphics, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to talk more about it. Good luck on the module this week, and I'll talk to you again soon.